Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive.
Glad to be here.
Today, we're diving into a topic that I think is really important. And, well, it's important and also just really complex. So
Yeah,
it's the whole idea of why it's so difficult to leave abusive relationships.
the big one. Yeah.
And we're basing this deep dive on this article called, well, it's a pretty straightforward title, Why Leaving an Abusive Relationship is So Difficult.
Straight to the point.
Yeah. And we're going to be kind of looking at, I guess, all the things like what makes it so hard to leave, and then, some of the psychological effects.
Right. All the different factors at play.
Yeah. And hopefully end on like a message of hope for, survivors and that kind of thing. So
Yeah, for sure.
a sensitive topic for sure.
It is.
So if anything, comes up during this and it's, a little too much, feel free to just take a pause,
Absolutely.
take a break, and come back to it when you're ready.
Yeah, self-care is important.
So, yeah, this article starts out with, well, honestly, a statistic that's really, really pretty shocking, I thought. It says that nearly 1 in 4 women
Wow.
experience, like, intimate partner violence in their lifetime.
That's huge. Yeah,
Which, when you think about that, that's a lot of people.
it really is.
And so it really makes you wonder, like, why? Why are so many people, like, staying in these relationships way longer than they want to be?
It's the question, isn't it? Why? And it's so complex because there's no one single answer.
Right.
There's so many different layers.
Right. And I think, the article does a good job of going through a lot of those different layers.
Yeah, definitely.
Like, talks about just, like, the very real, like, barrier of fear.
Yeah.
When somebody's threatening your safety, or even scarier, like the safety of your children.
It's terrifying. The thought of leaving can be just paralyzing.
Yeah, it's like you're stuck between a rock and a hard place, right? You want to escape this abuse, but it's just the fear of what might happen if you try is just so powerful.
It's so understandable. And on top of the fear, you often have this huge financial burden. The article talks about how so many abusers, they control all the finances. So it's like, if you leave, how do you start over? With no resources, maybe even kids to support.
Especially with kids, yeah.
It's a recipe for feeling completely trapped.
Yeah, and they shared, like, a specific anecdote about this woman who was basically stuck for years.
Oh, wow.
Because her abuser had, like, sabotaged her credit,
Oh, God.
like hidden assets,
Yeah.
and basically made her totally dependent on him.
Oh, that's awful.
And she wanted to leave, but she's like, I can't afford to, like, feed my kids if I leave.
It's heartbreaking.
Yeah. And it's unfortunately, it sounds like a really common tactic
It is,
to
unfortunately.
use that financial control as a way to, I guess, maintain power,
Yeah, absolutely.
in the relationship.
It's all about power and dominance.
Yeah. But then even when it's not necessarily like fear or finances that are like the primary barriers, there's this like whole thing about emotional manipulation.
Ugh. Yeah, that's the insidious stuff.
That to me is like one of the most fascinating parts, but also just like disturbing to read about.
I know, it's hard to wrap your head around.
The article, it describes how abusers, they're so good at like twisting things around that they make their partner believe that they're actually the problem.
Yeah.
And I just, how does that even work?
Well, it's a process, right? It doesn't happen overnight.
Right.
It's this gradual erosion.
Okay.
Like, it starts with little comments disguised as, concern or affection, but they slowly chip away at the victim's self-esteem.
Oh, I see, I see.
And then over time, it escalates,
Yes.
from those little comments to outright insults, accusations, blame shifting.
Yeah.
It's a form of gaslighting, really, where you end up questioning your own sanity.
Yeah. So it's like you're constantly being told you're not good enough.
Yeah.
That you're the one causing the problems.
Exactly.
And eventually you start to believe it.
It's tragic, but it's how the cycle gets perpetuated.
Yeah.
The abuser might apologize, promise to change. They might even be really kind for a while.
Right.
So the victim holds on to that hope, but then the abuse starts all over again.
Oh, so it's like this push and pull.
Exactly, and it's agonizing to be caught in that.
Yeah, it's like this never-ending emotional roller coaster.
It really is.
You can never get off.
And we haven't even gotten to the psychological effects yet.
Right.
The article talks about this thing called trauma bonding, which is, well, it's complicated.
Yeah, I remember reading about that.
It's not about love.
Oh, okay.
It's about survival. So imagine you're constantly exposed to this like cocktail of stress and fear, but then every once in a while, there's this little bit of relief.
Oh, like those moments of kindness we were talking about?
Yeah. Exactly. And it's this like intermittent reinforcement, which is really powerful.
Intermittent reinforcement. Sorry, what does that mean?
It means, like, the abuse isn't constant.
Okay.
There are periods of calm, maybe even affection or apologies.
Right.
But they're mixed in with the abuse.
Oh, so you never know what's coming next?
Exactly. It's unpredictable.
Yeah.
And that creates this powerful emotional cocktail that can lead to a very distorted sense of attachment.
So you're walking on eggshells all the time.
Right.
Never knowing what to expect.
Exactly.
But you're holding on to those moments of kindness as like a sign that maybe things will get better.
And it's not just you, it's your brain too.
Oh, okay.
Your brain's trying to make sense of this chaos.
Right.
And it starts associating the abuser with both the pain and the relief.
Oh.
So even hormones that are usually, associated with good things like bonding and pleasure, like oxytocin and dopamine, they get hijacked in this process and create this like biochemical connection to the abuser.
So you're literally like chemically bonded to them in a way.
Powerful stuff.
Yeah, and I can see how that would make it like so much harder to leave.
Right. It's not just the external barriers, it's your own brain chemistry working against you.
It's no wonder people feel trapped.
It's a trap on multiple levels. And then remember the self-esteem piece we talked about?
Right.
That constant erosion of self-worth?
Yeah.
When someone's constantly being abused, manipulated, controlled, their sense of self just takes a major hit.
They start to believe, like, I deserve this.
Exactly.
I'm not capable of anything better.
And that makes the abuser's manipulations even more effective.
Oh, wow.
It's like a vicious cycle.
Yeah.
What's interesting is that the author of this article, she actually shares her own story.
Oh, okay.
She was in not one, but two abusive relationships.
Wow. Now that I think about it, she mentioned that she didn't even realize it was abuse at first.
Right. It can be hard to see.
She thought like she was the problem.
Yeah, she thought she could fix it.
That, if she just tried harder, things would get better.
It's a common experience, unfortunately.
Yeah, I bet a lot of people can relate to that, like not even realizing that it's actually abuse.
It's very insidious, especially emotional abuse.
Yeah, I guess it starts so subtly. With these little acts of control, these little manipulations.
Right, and they escalate so slowly.
It's like the frog in boiling water.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Like the temperature rises so gradually that you don't realize you're in danger until it's too late.
Perfect analogy.
And the fact that she went through this, not once, but twice.
Yeah, in two different relationships.
Really highlights like how pervasive these patterns can be.
It's a powerful testament to that.
Yeah, especially if you haven't had the chance to like really heal and understand like what abuse even is.
That's why awareness is so important.
Right.
Education, support systems, all of that.
So that people can actually like recognize the signs
Yeah.
and break free from these cycles.
That's the goal.
What about her though? Like what were some of the things that actually helped her get out of these relationships?
I think one of the biggest things for her was just realizing it wasn't her fault.
Yeah.
That the abuse wasn't her fault.
Right.
That's huge. Like, that's a crucial first step for any survivor. Just recognizing you are not to blame for the abuser's actions.
It's almost like a light bulb moment, right?
It is.
When you suddenly, like, see things clearly.
Yeah.
And you can, like, release yourself from all that self-blame.
It's incredibly empowering.
Yeah.
And once she had that realization, she started building a support system.
Oh, okay.
Which is another, like, really key aspect of breaking free. She reconnected with some family members who, offered her unconditional love and encouragement.
Oh, that's nice.
And she also started seeing a therapist who specialized in trauma.
That makes sense.
So she had that professional support, too.
Yeah. Having people to talk to like, validate your experiences.
Oh, absolutely.
And offer guidance, I can see how that would make a huge difference.
It does.
It's that reminder that even though you feel so isolated, you're not actually alone.
Right.
No.
And she emphasized the importance of having different types of support, too.
Oh, okay.
So, like, her family was great for emotional support, but she also found practical help through local organizations that offered, like, financial assistance and legal guidance.
Oh, that's so smart.
It's like a multifaceted approach.
Right, so you're tackling the problem from different angles.
Yeah.
Did she talk about any strategies for regaining, like, financial independence?
She did.
Because I know for so many people, that's like
Yeah.
the biggest hurdle.
It's huge.
Yeah.
She actually mentioned how empowering it was
Oh, okay.
just to start taking small steps towards that.
Okay.
Even while she was still in the relationship, she secretly opened a separate bank account
Oh, wow.
and started saving, just small amounts of money whenever she could.
That's so smart.
It's like that saying, right?
Let's say.
The best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is today.
Oh, yeah.
So even small actions can really build momentum.
Yeah, for sure.
And that's what helped her, those small actions.
Okay.
Gave her the confidence and the resources to eventually break free.
Yeah.
But of course, leaving safely requires planning.
Right.
She stressed the importance of having a safety plan in place.
That's so important because leaving can actually be the most dangerous time.
It can be.
Right.
It often is.
When the abuser senses they're losing control,
Right.
they can really escalate their behavior.
Absolutely.
So what kind of things did she do to prepare?
She talked about gathering important documents.
Okay.
Like her driver's license, her birth certificate, and, storing them somewhere safe outside the house.
It's smart.
She also memorized the number for a domestic violence hotline.
Oh, okay.
And she identified safe places that she could go to in case of an emergency.
God, it's just heartbreaking to think about.
Yeah.
Like all that planning
Yeah.
and the secrecy involved
Yeah.
just to ensure your own safety.
It's a reality for so many people.
It is.
It really speaks to the need for more awareness
Yeah.
and stronger support systems.
And it goes back to that thing we were talking about before.
Yeah.
About challenging those societal expectations.
Right, those unspoken pressures.
Yeah, to stay in the relationship.
Yeah.
Like for the kids.
Right.
Or to avoid the stigma of divorce.
It's powerful stuff.
Yeah, and I think with abuse, it can be even stronger.
Yeah, definitely.
Those pressures,
Right,
because
yeah.
there's this misconception that it's a private matter.
Right.
Something that should be handled within the family.
It's not, though.
But that silence just protects the abuser.
Exactly.
And the victim.
And it perpetuates this cycle of shame and secrecy.
Right, and it prevents people from getting help.
Yeah.
The author, she mentioned that some of her friends and family, even with the best intentions,
Yeah.
they initially, urged her to try to work things out, to give her partner another chance.
It's a common reaction.
It's like people are so uncomfortable
They are.
with the idea of abuse that they just try to, rationalize it.
They try to minimize it.
Yeah, or blame the victim for not leaving sooner.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It highlights the need for education and empathy.
Yeah.
We need to understand that abuse is a pattern of behavior,
Right?
not just a one-time incident.
Right.
And we need to stop questioning the victim's choices
Yeah.
and start holding abusers accountable for their actions.
You mentioned earlier that she transitioned from being a survivor
Yeah,
to becoming an advocate.
she did.
Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, that's one of the most inspiring parts of her story. After she got out of her second abusive relationship, she decided she wanted to use her experience to help others.
Wow.
She actually founded a program
Oh, wow.
called S.A.I.L,
Okay.
which stands for Survivors Advocate, Inspire, and Live.
Oh, I like that.
And through this program, she offers workshops, support groups, individual counseling, all to help survivors navigate that complex process of healing and rebuilding their lives.
Wow. So she took all that pain
Yeah,
and turned it into a purpose.
she did.
What kind of services does S.A.I.L provide?
It's a whole range of services, really tailored to the needs of survivors. So, for example, they have workshops on recognizing the signs of abuse,
Okay.
setting boundaries, developing healthy relationship patterns,
That's great.
and they have support groups
Oh, that's good.
where survivors can connect with each other.
Right. People who understand what they're going through.
Exactly. There's so much power in sharing your story,
Yeah.
knowing you're not alone.
Yeah, for sure.
And they also provide practical assistance with things like safety planning,
Okay.
legal advocacy, financial literacy.
Right. So,
It's really a holistic approach,
yeah.
recognizing that healing from abuse involves all these different aspects of your life.
So it's not just escaping the danger.
Yeah.
It's about empowering people
It is.
to create a safer future for themselves.
Absolutely.
And that's what it's all about, right?
Yeah.
Shifting the narrative from victimhood
Yeah.
to empowerment and resilience.
Exactly.
That's such an important message.
It is.
Because so often we hear these stories about abuse
Yeah.
and we feel overwhelmed by the darkness of it all.
These can be heavy.
But, her story
Yeah.
It reminds us that there is light at the end of the tunnel,
There is.
and that her story
Yeah.
also highlights
It does.
the power of sharing our stories,
Mm.
both to heal ourselves,
Yeah.
but also to inspire others.
Right.
By speaking out, by breaking the silence, we
Yeah.
challenge those societal expectations.
Good.
And we create a culture where survivors feel supported.
And empowered to share their stories.
So while we've been talking a lot about, like, the individual experience
Yeah.
of leaving an abusive relationship, I think it's also important to acknowledge, like, the broader societal context
Absolutely.
that contributes to this.
We can't ignore that.
Yeah.
It's crucial.
We can't talk about domestic violence without addressing the systemic factors
Right.
that perpetuate it.
Like gender inequality,
Yeah.
poverty,
Right.
lack of access to resources.
Yeah, those are all huge issues
They are.
that we could probably do, like, whole deep dives on
Absolutely.
each one of those.
Each
Yeah.
one deserves its own deep dive.
But, in the context of what we're talking about today, do you have
Yeah.
any thoughts on, like, how we as individuals and as a society
Yeah.
can challenge those systemic factors?
It's the big question.
Yeah.
And create a more supportive environment for survivors.
Yeah. I mean, it can feel overwhelming, right? Like, where do we even start?
Right. Right.
But I think education is huge.
Okay.
Like, we need to be having these conversations about domestic violence
Yeah.
from a young age.
Right.
Not just about, like, the physical abuse, but also the emotional and psychological manipulation.
Right. Because that's just as damaging, really.
Absolutely. And it's about teaching kids how to recognize healthy relationships, how to set boundaries, how to respect themselves and others.
Yeah, like building that foundation early on.
Exactly. And that education needs to go beyond schools, too.
Oh, right. Yeah.
It needs to be in our homes, our communities, our workplaces. We need to challenge those beliefs that condone violence or silence victims.
Like what kinds of beliefs?
Oh, like those sayings, boys will be boys, or it's just a lover's quarrel.
Yeah, yeah.
Those things, they seem harmless, but they contribute to a culture that normalizes abuse
Right, it's like we're minimizing it.
instead of taking it seriously.
We need to change the narrative.
Yeah.
Shift the focus from blaming the victim to holding the abuser accountable.
You've worked with a lot of survivors.
I have.
What are some of the most common, like, misconceptions about domestic violence that you encounter?
One of the biggest ones is that it only happens in certain groups.
Oh, like certain socioeconomic groups.
Yeah, or cultures. But the reality is abuse can happen anywhere.
Right, to anyone.
Anyone, regardless of their background, education, income level.
It makes me think about how, like, in the media,
Yeah.
domestic violence is often portrayed as, like, this very specific type of situation.
Right, it's very stereotypical.
Yeah. And so I think that can make it harder for people to recognize it,
Absolutely.
like in their own lives or the lives of people they know.
It's not always so obvious.
Right. It's not always black and white.
And another big myth is that the victims are weak
Oh, yeah, I've heard that one.
or that they somehow provoke the abuse.
Hmm.
But that's just not true. Abusers are master manipulators.
Yeah.
They often target strong, independent individuals,
Right.
and then they systematically break them down.
Oh, wow.
It's all about control.
So it's not about what the victim is doing.
No.
It's about the abuser's need for power.
Exactly.
And that can manifest in so many ways.
It can.
It's not always physical.
Right. It can be emotional, psychological, financial, even spiritual.
Right, right.
It's about one person exerting power and control over another.
And that can be really hard to spot sometimes.
It can, especially for people who are outside the relationship.
Yeah.
So it's important to be aware of the signs.
Okay, so what are some red flags
Hmm.
that we should be looking out for?
Well, things like excessive jealousy or possessiveness,
Okay.
controlling behavior,
Right?
trying to isolate someone from their support system, constant criticism or put-downs,
Yeah.
minimizing or denying the abuse.
If you see any of that, it's a problem.
It's a big red flag.
But what if you try to talk to someone and they, like, don't want to talk about it?
I know.
Or they deny that anything's wrong?
It's tough.
Yeah, how do you approach those conversations?
You got to approach it with empathy and understanding.
Okay.
Don't force them to open up.
Right.
But let them know that you're there for them without judgment
Yeah.
if they ever need to talk.
Sometimes just knowing that someone cares.
It can make all the difference.
Yeah.
That's the first step.
What about on a societal level?
Mm.
Like, what kind of systemic changes need to happen?
Well, we need more funding for domestic violence shelters and support services.
Right.
We need stronger laws
Hmm.
to hold abusers accountable and
Yeah.
protect victims.
And we have to address those underlying issues,
We do.
like poverty and inequality
Absolutely.
and lack of access to mental health care.
It's all
It's
connected.
like we need to create this, like, safety net
Yeah.
that catches people
Yeah.
before they fall through the cracks.
Yes. And provide support at every level.
Yeah.
It's a big task, but it's necessary.
So where do we go from here? We've covered so much in this deep dive.
We have.
It's easy to feel overwhelmed.
It is.
Like, what can our listeners actually do
Yeah.
to be part of the solution?
Well, educate yourself
Okay.
about the different forms of abuse and the resources that are available in your community.
Right.
Donate to or volunteer at a local domestic violence shelter.
Okay.
Support organizations that are working to change policies and advocate for survivors.
Yeah.
And most importantly, speak up. Challenge those jokes and comments that perpetuate violence.
Right. Right.
Have those uncomfortable conversations with your friends and family.
Yeah. Even when it's hard.
Even when it's hard.
Because every little bit helps.
Every action, no matter how small, makes a difference.
I like that.
It all adds up.
That's a great call to action.
We can't just wait for change to happen.
Right.
We have to be the change.
We have to be active participants.
Exactly.
And I think the author's story,
Yeah,
it's a really good reminder that healing is possible,
it is.
that resilience is real,
Absolutely.
and that even in the darkest times,
Yeah,
hope can emerge.
it can.
That's such a powerful message.
It's a message of empowerment, of finding your voice, and of using your experience to help others.
Right. It's about taking that pain
Yeah.
and turning it into something positive.
And remembering that you're not alone.
Yeah.
We're all in this together.
Well, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive.
It's been a pleasure.
And to our listeners, remember, you're not alone. There is help available.
Please reach out if you need it.
Speak up and keep fighting for a future free from abuse.
We're all in this together.